Outstanding. Beautiful. That's on video.
Okay, I cannot believe it's the last Sunday in January already.
Art flies.
January we always use the theme of getting back to basics, which we've been doing for the whole month. And so today would be the last in that theme. So we're doing this year by digging into and defining some of the words and phrases we use in this science of mind, this new thought teaching. And for a lot of people,
Set phone back there.
let me unplug it.
I did.
For a lot of people, that comes in many different ways. It could be whistles from a phone. It could be many different things. So there is actually a book, though, called How to Speak Religious Science. And because there are so many terms, and I remember coming into this and teaching many years ago, and really, as I said last week, not understanding a lot of the phraseology or the meaning of the words. You know, it's a slightly different language, but it is very, very empowering when we learn them. It really is. And some of those words could be the divine creative process, old beliefs, demonstrations, consciousness, that's a big one in New Thought circles. Consciousness, we all have one. The law, affirmative life, the absolute, which we spoke of last week, the absolute spiritual truth. So these are just a couple of the many words that we use in our science of mind. And then we added a new one, which everyone loved. What is it?
Pronoia.
Yes! Pronoia, which means the universe is conspiring for us, and the opposite of pronoia is paranoia. So I'm going to choose pronoia. Thank you very much. Today we add a new word that I think that Ernest Holmes would have really enjoyed. And the word is habitudes. This is a good one. Yeah. Habitudes, right? So what is a habitude, you may ask? A habitude is a habit of attitude. Okay? Your attitude about life, about the one element that combines you with your consciousness, which we spoke in depth about last week. Your attitudes create your consciousness, okay? What is an attitude according to the dictionary? It is a feeling or a way of thinking that affects your behavior. So what are we thinking? What attitude are we holding? Because that's what we're living. Remember that. Life is not happening to us. All right? We are happening to life through our habits and our attitudes. And then the book, here's a book on this, Obvious Power, 25 Habitudes That Shift Your Thoughts into Actions. And that was written by Dr. Harry Morgan Moses. Maybe some of you, he's on the West Coast. He wrote this: a major aspect of creating habitudes is being able to think in new ways about subjects which are familiar to us. A good habitude causes the spontaneous first reaction of our mind to move into the direction of our fulfillment. Stay with this. If we can layer our habitudes in such a way that our responding and acting in a forward, life-giving manner become as natural as breathing, we will have gained mastery over our lives. I like to call that conscious thinking. When we are really aware of the thoughts that are running our lives. Because it's crazy. Our thoughts are running our lives. It's crazy, but it's true. So which thought are you choosing? Which one are you picking and living out? The fact is that we all get hooked in habitual ways of seeing and responding to the world. And often those habitual ways of seeing and responding don't bring us peace, don't bring us the freedom, the joy, the abundance, the wholeness, the desires that we would like to experience in our lives. They move us in the opposite direction a lot of times. Why? Because we're focusing on what we don't want and what we lack. And when we focus on what we don't want and what's lacking in our lives, we create more of it. It's a very simple philosophy that we have here, very simple philosophy, except it's very tricky. And it requires us to be astute, to really pay attention to what thoughts are running around and running our lives. So, as Ernest Holmes said, change your thinking, change your life. Couldn't have said a more powerful, there's not a more powerful statement. And Holmes wrote this in a very succinct way in Science of Mind, our book. We might well remember always that unless we control thought, it will control us. Are your thoughts controlling your life? Are they running your life and your happiness? That's where we do the mind check, where we go in and we think, what am I thinking? And we know what we're thinking by what we're experiencing, okay? And life does happen. And we can have compassion for ourselves, because stuff does happen in life that kind of throws us a curveball, or just wreaks havoc and suffering in our lives. But there's nothing more to suffer than the idea that we are separate from the one power, the one infinite potential of life itself, the divine goodness of God. That's the biggest way that we suffer. We torture ourselves, thinking that we are not worthy, that it is not within us, and it is. And I love this straightforward statement this is from Pam Grout, who we saw at the last ANTN conference. New one coming up October 15th. Pam Grout was really an incredible presenter, and she wrote, well, the book I'm quoting from is E2 Squared. She writes this: most of us are still operating out of the mental architecture of our ancestors. Love this. We think we're running our lives with our brilliant ideas and thoughts. We think we're affirming our intentions and creating new possibilities. We do. But in reality, she writes, we're simply recycling old tapes, knee-jerk reactions and conditioning, and automatic behaviors, most of which we picked up before we were the age of 5. That's in her book. So this morning, you know what? When we were little kids, we picked up that whole belief system. Mm-hmm. And it's running our lives. So that little kid is still running our lives. So if that little kid was grounded in fear and not love, that's still running our lives. So just to be aware of that we can change that. We can absolutely change that right here, right now. Just changing our thoughts, but being diligent about it. Being diligent about it. This morning we're going to apply a 3-step practice to guarantee to create new habitats. And I'd like to add that that's a money-back guarantee, all right? To experience our new normal. Would you like a new normal?
Yes.
I'm always loving new normals. So if you work these steps, they will manifest. They will manifest. So as a New Thought leader, the late and great Johnny Coleman, she was the founder of a humongous temple. It was Christ Universal Temple, which was based in Chicago. Humongous. Very straight up, New Thought. This woman can manifest. She had herself a nice driver driving her limo all over the place. She said this. She said this stuff works if you work it. So that's why we must be diligent in how we are thinking, how we are responding to the situations in our lives. Because there's always situations in our lives. It's part of our human evolution. These practices work if you work them. So that's the deal. And the deal is also, this is not rocket science. It's actually quite simple. It really is. It's quite simple and straightforward. And you've heard me say before, these are not esoteric teachings. But if applied, they can make all the difference in your life. And if not applied, they can make a big difference as well. Just not the difference you might want to experience. So the first practice is noticing when you're hooked. meaning caught in a habitual pattern which causes you to suffer. Our thoughts cause us to suffer. Our thoughts about any given situation cause us to suffer. And so notice when you get hooked. It's really important. You often speak and act in certain ways which only serve to strengthen those habits of resentment, of anger, of blaming others, and so forth that we get into. You'll find after you do this a while that you don't like to be in those situations. You don't particularly like gossip anymore. You don't want to be in those resentful. I mean, our forgiveness class is fantastic. There are like 20 people in this class. It's just amazing energy. And everyone is working these principles. They're all the same. They're working the principle of letting go and letting God, of forgiving everyone for everything as best they can. And remember, that doesn't mean that we forget, but it means that we free ourselves of the resentment, of blame, of anger. And that's just holding us down. That's just heavy stuff. So this is called many things by not even New Thought, just thought leaders. Spiritual books have been written all about it. But here are some of the ways that we move into living a life of awareness, being the observer. Developing the compassionate witness. Noticing what you're noticing. Always like that one. Standing guard at the portals of your mind. So it's simply awake versus being on autopilot. And a lot of people live our lives, or live their lives, we don't in here, on autopilot. Now, we're all awake and aware. We are all moving in that upward spiral of the revelation of the power of who we truly are. That's what we're doing here. Yes, and you can work this backwards as well. If you aren't really awake, and if you're not standing guard at the portals of your mind, not being the observer, and not noticing what you are noticing, but if you find yourself suffering, you know when you're suffering, you know what it feels like, then backwards, go backwards and take a look at what your attitude is. Really take a look, like what was I thinking before this entire episode took place? And a lot of the times it's a made-up thought in our minds that we believe. And it puts us into anxiety, it puts us into fear, it puts us into anger, and all of those things we don't want to feel anymore. And we're going to feel them, though. I mean, we're having this human experience, but we don't have to hang out there. We don't have to stay in hell and build that condo. We can keep moving right through. We're not going to live there anymore. No, that's what these teachings are all about. We're not living there anymore. We're not living in hell. Hell is here on earth. We're going to choose heaven. And that beautiful song by Lou Doty, I'm choosing heaven today. Yes, that's what we're doing. So, and then ask, is this attitude habitual? And there's a good chance that it is. It's a good chance that I've found it in my own life, living, and it's the same, when there's a pattern of that same feeling within me, and different circumstance, different everything, but the same feeling, it triggers that old pattern within me. And so I constantly bring myself back to the present moment and know that God is my good. God is my source. The infinite light of the divine is within me. And I can tap into that any time I choose. And that brings me back to center. And there's more, because now we're moving into the second one. Benjamin Franklin spoke to practice number 2 when he said, who's strong? This is what he said. Who's strong? He who can conquer his thoughts. That's who's strong. When you can control your thinking, you are powerful. You are really powerful. The second practice then is to do something different. Maybe it's something that you wanted to do, but we're afraid to take that step. Take the step. What's going to happen? You have a guide. You have a power for good that's always supporting you. So take the step. This practice is a bit more difficult to catch on because it goes against the grain of our current habitudes. Once we mess with those habitudes, You know what happens? All this stuff comes up, but it's coming up for healing. It's coming up for us to take a look at it and to heal it, to really heal it and know that most of the time we're making it up. It's an old pattern, it's an old thought that no longer serves us. A habit, by definition, is something that we do over and over again. And it becomes automatic. And it becomes like, well, this is the truth, this is the way it is. And we can change habits. Like, who in here has quit smoking? Like, relapse. Okay, in this now moment. Okay, so you see that. That's a big habit to break.
I quit for a week.
That's a big habit to break. And we choose a fresh alternative. We consciously choose. We begin, when we do that though, we create new habits and new attitudes. So you start again, today, right now, in this moment. Everything is possible in this moment. Yesterday's gone. Tomorrow isn't here. Right now, we change our attitudes. Charles Fillmore, in his atom-smashing Power of Mind, wrote this: "Your mind, body, and affairs are the expression of your thoughts." So if you're not happy, change your mental habits. This may not seem practical to you at first, but if you faithfully practice, you will witness practical results. You can cultivate the habit of seeing the good, the true, and the bright side of every subject. When I walked in, one of our wonderful new members said, "Isn't it a beautiful day it's raining out? Isn't it glorious?" And it was like, wow. Instead, it's just that slight shift. It's a small thing, but it's a slight shift, and you're like, yes, I'm so grateful for that rain. We need rain. We need rain.
Tomatoes.
So here's a story of a woman working on changing her habitudes. I'd like to give you stories and examples. She had had an altercation with her husband and had her typical habitude reaction to something he said to her. She got angry and she got defensive. But she noticed what had happened, and she realized that she needed to do something to change her mood. See that awareness? To find a fresh alternative so she could come back to him with a different conversation. All right, she realized it. And then she realized that choir practice at her church was starting soon, and she loved singing. We all know that song lifts our attitude, our vibration. So she loved singing in the church choir. So she and her teenage son, who also enjoyed singing in the church choir, jumped in the car and they headed off. That particular practice was exhilarating. And she felt like very heavenly. She felt blessed. She felt high energy. She even stopped at the church's bookstore and browsed and saw "Honk If You Love Jesus" bumper sticker. And here are her words. "So I bought the bumper sticker and immediately put it on the back of my car. And I'm really glad I did. What an uplifting experience followed. I stopped at a light at a very busy intersection, just lost in my heavenly thoughts and feelings, and how I was going to make amends to my husband when I got home. And I didn't notice that the light had turned green. When suddenly, a lot of people who love Jesus, why the boy behind me started to honk like crazy. He must really love Jesus, because pretty soon he rolled down his window and yelled, 'Go, Jesus, go!' Everyone else started honking too. And I leaned out of my window and waved and smiled at all of those loving people. There must have been a guy from Florida back there, because I could hear him yelling something about a sunny beach. And I saw him waving in a funny way with only one finger. I asked my teenage son, what does that mean? And he was so caught up in the joy, my son, that he could hardly catch his breath from laughing. But finally told me that it was a Hawaiian good luck sign. So I leaned out the window and gave him a good luck sign back. A couple of people were so caught up in the joy of this joyous moment that they got out of their cars and were walking toward me. And I knew they wanted to celebrate with me. But then I noticed the light had changed again. So I stepped on the gas, and it's a good thing because I was the only car to get across that intersection. I looked back at all my new friends standing there and leaned out of the window and gave them a big smile and held up that Hawaiian good luck one more time as I drove away. Sorry, but I couldn't help myself with that one. I was just like, that's it. But it's showing you the example of changing the attitude. She changed her attitude, and everyone was uplifted except for her new friends. Everyone else was uplifted. So, to bring back that quote, this is the quote we have. You can cultivate the habit of seeing the good, the true, the bright side of every subject. You can cultivate that habit. This is a habit that's consciously thought out. Just watch what's going on when you know your buttons are being pushed. And that takes us to practice number 3. The third and final practice is making this exploration a way of life, a way of living. The notion that there is not just a one-time thing when you notice. You're hooked. Choose a fresh alternative, and then it's all over. Because when you explore life and feel that this is a one-time thing, it's not. It's constant. Change is constant. So our response to change is constant. And that's where we can shift our entire lives by how we respond to something that pushes a button. And a button is just what I call a wound button. It's an old wound, an old belief. That's what it is. And that's why taking these spiritual classes, we know, anyone that's been in a class that is in a class knows that it really keeps us centered. It keeps us anchored. It allows us to remember. Coming here on Sundays, hopefully you're getting something to remember to use during the week. Because if you don't use it, you lose it. There is no one that can do this for you. You must do it for yourself. And then, God meant everything for our good. God meant everything for our good. This infinite creative energy, that's our God, is a divine energy that's brilliant in every way, creative in every way. And in Genesis, the classic example of this biblical narrative is Joseph. The youngest, and you might know this from the play, the youngest and favorite son of Jacob, for whom his father made a coat of many colors. Remember? All right. Not everyone. He was mistreated, and we're going to go with it anyway. Anyway, Joseph was mistreated and betrayed and eventually sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. Eventually, you watch as Joseph suffers. After a great deal of hardship, he became the second highest ruler in Egypt, right next to the Pharaoh. Joseph had dreams of prophecy and dreamed of a famine that was coming. And he convinced the Pharaoh that this was true, and they stored grain for many years. And they were preparing for this famine that he had seen in his dream. When the famine hit, the people from everywhere, including his brothers, came to get grain. By way of forgiving his brothers, always going to come back down to that forgiveness, he said to them, "Ye may have intended evil against me, but God meant it for good." The divine always means it for good. I truly believe that. And when you truly believe that you have this power, this CEO, this infinite, glorious ability to connect with the love of God, it's the truth of your being, everything everything becomes simpler, becomes smaller, because the greatest gift we can have is connecting with that indwelling divinity, that love of God that is for us, that wants us to express the nature, and the nature of God is always good, always good. No duality there. There is not a judgmental God. We don't believe in that. We believe in the God of love. And if you have a God of unconditional love, you cannot have a God of the opposite of unconditional love. It can't be. It doesn't even make sense. Does it? Doesn't make sense to me. So I choose to go with the God of that God, the God of my understanding, of my belief system. And so I want to leave you with a few final thoughts about what could possibly be some new habitudes. And they come from the Bible as well. But this time they are words written by Apostle Paul. It's lovely. In a letter to the Philippians. He wrote this, supposedly. Well, we take the Bible not literally. It's a great example when we metaphysically understand a lot of it. But there's a lot of beauty in these words. Well, Paul wrote this in his letter. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. What are we focusing on? What are we focusing on? Because we know that what we focus on grows. We are manifesting beings. We are always manifesting. Check what we're thinking. Check what you're thinking. And so make these things your habitudes. Think of the higher vibration. Think of the peace and the love and the abundance and the glory that is yours to share, that is yours to experience. Think on those things. Change those old habits if they no longer serve you. And listen to these things, and you will move forward in the direction of fulfillment in your life. It must be. By the law of divinity, it must be. We can only manifest what we can hold in our minds, what we can think, what we can feel. And so we want to manifest. I know we all want to manifest happiness. Then we must think on those happy thoughts. We must, no matter what's going on. Sometimes it's a little more challenging than other times. But see it through and hold the highest good. Hold that thought. Hold that connection with the infinite love of the divine. And you will know that God truly does mean it for good. It really does. This loving energy is the truth of each and every one of us. And remember, it is your life, and only you can choose what you wish to think and what you wish to feel. No one else has that power. If they do, I advise you, as I did, take it back. Take it back, and don't be a victim of anyone else's thinking. And so it is.